This article right here, holy crap. It's a few thousand words. It's very well written. It's an interesting read. And I don't know what they're attempting to do. Actually, it's one of those things where everybody just lays out their plan right in front of you, and you're supposed to be demoralized from it. You're supposed to look at it, read it out. It's like, holy fuck, there isn't a single stone that they left unturned. There isn't a single narrative that they're not going to leave discussed and expanded upon. And they really had this figured out from top to bottom. They, in their words, fortified this election so that there was only going to be one outcome. They had it all figured out, and there was nothing anybody could do about it. It was already decided in the fall of 2019. So what I took away from this after reading it, and we're not going to go through it word by word because, like I said, it's a few thousand words long. A lot of people are just glossing over it and going a couple of paragraphs deep, and there's good reason that they're highlighting the pages that they are, but there's a lot of juice in here, so I'll try to do something shorter, because if we go through it word by word, paragraph by paragraph, we'll be here for like 90 minutes or 2 hours, and ain't nobody got time for that. What's prominent here, and just the picture that's, I guess, the highlight. What do you see first? What do you see here? Okay, you see the Capitol. Obviously, the first thing that my eye gets drawn to, just as a piece of artwork there, it's just the big picture of Trump, okay? And then after a while, then you see the lady in a hoodie holding up a champagne bottle. Then you see what only your mind can piece together is a Biden sign, but it's not your typical Biden-Harris blue sign, because it's obviously artistically differed. But then once you start to get down into the minutia of it, it's just the best possible representation of what you could see for Democrats. Everybody celebrating, everybody happy. And then as you get a little bit closer, you see that there's a Capitol building and there's storm clouds only around Trump. Okay, you got the Q shaman, because of course he's become the symbol of this, because that's all that mainstream media wants to cover about it. And then you got a guy who has the barbecue cut off t-shirt. It just makes Trump and his supporters look like rubes. They're just angry people. They're angry all the time. And then you take a look at all of the Biden supporters, and they're in jubilation. There's several women with signs. You'd imagine that they're smiling. You can see that their eyebrows are raised in the photos that you can see there. But it's people who normally wouldn't be caught dead with an American flag wrapped around their shoulders, especially at the bottom there, high-fiving one another, and the other one's wearing a Biden-Harris t-shirt, which the only time that I've ever seen those t-shirts are on people that are working at the campaign. So, but what's actually missing, other than one little cardboard cutout being held by some humanity, is an actual representation of the current administration. There's one picture of Joe, and he's what, like a fifth the size of Trump, maybe? It's another perfect representation in this article that it didn't really matter who the Democrats were going to run, because it wasn't certain that Joe Biden was going to be the nominee. He was one of the front runners in fall of 2019 when this entire plan was hatched. It just, whoever was going to be there on the DNC side was going to be the president. And they had the plan figured out. So here, we'll do a little bit of verbatim reading, because there's quite a bit here to begin with, and I think that's where most people get caught up in. But, we're going to dig a little bit deeper. We're going to go through and parse out some of the more important parts to know what we're going to be dealing with in the future here. Because this might seem a little bit overwhelming, but I think that this is just one of those overwhelming presence sort of attacks where it's like, don't bother fighting back. We have this all figured out. But at the same time, this was just them blowing their load. There's not much left after this. So a weird thing happened after November 3rd election. Nothing. I beg to differ. The nation was braced for chaos. Liberal groups had vowed to take to the streets, planning hundreds of protests across the country. Yes, that's exactly what happened. Antifa rioted in Washington. We have proof of that. Portland, the original Starbucks was attacked. There was a bunch of different windows blown out in the downtown core as well. Seattle rioted. I think there was something in New York as well. And this was all on election night, okay? Right-wing militias were girding for battle. Where? Didn't see any instances of Trump voters taking to the streets. You guys remember on election night, everything was looking like really nice, really good. And in a poll before election day, 75% of Americans voiced concern about violence. Instead, an eerie quiet descended. No, it didn't. As President Trump refused to concede, the response was not mass action, but crickets. Yes, because according to you guys, the media that is, we wouldn't know who the winner of the presidential election was on the night of the election. It could be days, it could be weeks. When media organizations called the race for Joe Biden on November 7th, so why would Trump have conceded the night of November 3rd or the wee hours of November 4th if nothing was decided before the 7th? Weird. Jubilation broke out instead. More riots in Portland and Seattle, but okay, yes, some people did take to the streets in the morning, most notably outside the White House. I remember down the street from the entrance of the White House, where they were kicking around inflatable of Trump because he lives rent-free in the minds of so many of these activists. But yeah, if you want to call the theoretical burning in effigy of the current president because your team won, okay, that's jubilation, I suppose. I can concede that. As people thronged cities across the United States to celebrate the democratic process that resulted in Trump's ouster. That's one way to put it. A second odd thing happened amid Trump's attempts to reverse the result. Fair. Corporate America turned on him. Not fair. When did corporate America ever have Trump's back? Never. Never, 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 never. Hundreds of major business leaders, many of whom had backed Trump's candidacy and supported his policies, like who? Called on him to concede. I don't know any of those companies, though, okay? The Goya dude is still 100% behind him. Mike Lindell, who we're going to have to catch up with probably tomorrow or Sunday, is still a full-throated Trump supporter. And outside of that, I can't think of any other big business that would have turned their back on Trump that hadn't already. Like in the prior 4 years. 5 years, I suppose. To the president, something felt amiss. It was all very, very strange, Trump said on December 2nd. Within days of the election, we witnessed an orchestrated effort to anoint the winner, even while many key states were still being counted. In a way, Trump was right. Very much so. Nobody was finished counting. God, I don't think the entire election was even done counting before the beginning of December, if I recall correctly. There was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes. This is what Time is legitimately writing. One, that both circulated the protests and coordinated the resistance from CEOs. Yes. Something that CEOs of major businesses have been doing the entirety of 2020, okay? You remember all of those heartfelt and very important messages that the likes of, Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Nike, all of them put out. Call of Duty, whatever the most current one is right now, had a splash screen before you could even play the game, pledging allegiance to Black Lives Matter. Sony delaying a press conference for a couple of days because St. Floyd had shuffled off this mortal coil into the afterverse. That's just the most recent example, but we could even go back to Brett Kavanaugh if we need to go ahead and reaffirm that big business and the peaceful protesters out there are hand in hand. Both surprises were the result of an informal alliance between left-wing activists and the business titans, like we just talked about, that has been going on for a very long time. The pact was formalized in a terse, little-noticed joint statement of the United States Chamber of Commerce and the AFL-CIO, published on Election Day. Hadn't heard about this, but I also did some research into it, and yes, this has been reported since at least at or a few days after the inauguration. Both sides would come to see it as a sort of implicit bargain, inspired by the summer's massive, sometimes destructive, racial justice protests. Funny how they word that, and you'll see how they use the perversion of words through the rest of this article as well. Inspired by the summer's massive, sometimes destructive, racial justice protests. We'll put a little pin in that. In which the forces of labor came together with the forces of capital to keep the peace. Really? Didn't do a very good job. And oppose Trump's assault on democracy. Here's what everybody's parsing out right now, and I would be not doing my job if I didn't cover this as well. Their work touched every aspect of the election. They got states to change their voting systems and laws and helped secure hundreds of millions in public and private funding. I can't comment on that, but I can read it verbatim. They fended off voter suppression lawsuits, recruited armies of poll workers, and got millions of people to vote by mail for the very first time. They successfully pressured social media companies to take a harder line against disinformation and used data-driven strategies to fight viral smears. Yes, you remember the little fact-check boxes on Twitter and on Facebook. That's about YouTube for some videos as well if you're using the desktop site, where anything that would be coming from the Trump camp would be marked with significant disinformation markers. Whatever they would be, the ones on Twitter continued to change. I don't use Facebook, don't know what they look like, know that they do exist. And then the ones for YouTube as well, that you'd learn more about how this is so secure and fun. But would they ever show up on a left-leaning, democratic, mainstream narrative? Well, fuck no. Everything was perfectly fine. They executed national public awareness campaigns that helped Americans understand how the vote could unfold over days or weeks. This was going back quite a long time, preventing Trump's conspiracy theories and false claims of victory from getting more traction, suppressing information. It's weird how previously in this article they said that there was a conspiracy afoot. There was a conspiracy unfolding behind the scenes, referring to it as a good thing. But as soon as Trump comes up, now they're using conspiracy in a negative tone. After Election Day, they monitored every pressure point to ensure that Trump could not overturn the result. The untold story of the election is the thousands of people of both parties who accompanied the triumph of American democracy and its very foundation, says Norm Eisen, a prominent lawyer and former Obama administration official. That's how he gained his prominency. Who recruited Republicans and Democrats to the board of the Voter Protection Program. See how mad they are that Trump won in 2016? It was supposed to be an immediate continuation of the Obama administration. They could not stand, and they made that very obvious over the past 4 years, that whoever usurped the reign of Queen Hillary, whoever tarnished the bronze glow of the Barack Hussein Obama administration will pay and will be destroyed for it. Now we're jumping ahead a little bit. This is the inside story of the conspiracy to save the 2020 election. See how now we're going back to using conspiracy as being a positive term of something wonderful, of a bunch of people getting together in order to save our democracy. Based on the access of the group's inner workings, never before seen documents, and interviews with dozens of those involved from across the political spectrum. Oh, they're definitely on the spectrum. It is a story of an unprecedented, creative, and determined campaign whose success also reveals how close the nation came to disaster. See how they refer to a potential second term of President Donald Trump? It would have been a disaster. Interesting. Every attempt to interfere with the proper outcome of the election was defeated. Let me read that again. Every attempt to interfere with the proper outcome of this election was defeated. They already had it decided. You guys had no choice in the matter, says Ian Bassin, co-founder of Protect Democracy, a nonpartisan rule of law advocacy group. But it's massively important for the country to understand that it didn't happen accidentally. The system didn't work magically. Democracy is not self-executing. Remember George Carlin's quote? It's a big club and you ain't in it. So here we go. There's a few different subsections to this article as well. And take the time. It's about a 20-30 minute read if you read it very intensely and properly. But here we go. Sometime in the fall of 2019, Mike Pordhoser became convinced the election was headed for disaster in the fall of 2019. Headed for disaster. Okay, let's remember back then. How was the country doing in 2019? Everything was on the up and up. Businesses were flourishing. Record low unemployment rate for several different categories, and even as a wider swath of the entire country, $2,000 fewer taxes, the best economy of our lifetime, as according to Jim Cramer of Mad Money fame. So let's get into the background of Podhoser here. Senior advisor to the president of the AFL-CIO, the nation's largest union federation. So the head of the nation's largest union federation. Okay. You guys remember how nearly every union backed the Democrats, so obviously he would have considered the current trajectory. It looked like Trump was going to walk to a second term until the coup hit. And this is prior to the coup really making headlines. And the uninspiring field of the DNC was not producing any winner, okay? Porthoser had to take this into his own hands. A group of liberal strategists he brought together in the early 2000s led to the creation of the Analyst Institute, a secretive firm that applies specific methods to political campaigns. He was also involved in founding of Catalyst, a flagship progressive data company. They will become important here. The endless chatter in Washington about political strategy, Porthoser believes, has little to do with how change really gets made. You have to take it into your own hands. The basic take on politics is that it's all pretty obvious if you don't overthink or swallow the prevailing framework whole, he once wrote. After that, just relentlessly identify your assumptions and challenge them. That's good advice, and I wish this guy just wasn't such a scumbag. Trump's election in 2016, credited in part to his unusual strength among the sort of blue-collar white voters who once dominated the AFL-CIO, prompted Porthoser to question his assumptions about voter behavior. Yes, because he was probably going off those outdated and patently incorrect polls at the time. Because this dude's not down with the actual union workers. He sits in his ivory tower all day just reading the likes of the Washington Post, New York Times, He's one of those guys who wouldn't know the difference between a claw and a ball-peen hammer. He began circulating weekly numbers-crunching memos to a small circle of allies, to hosting strategy sessions in D.C., But when he began to worry about the election itself, he didn't want to seem paranoid. Just like every other member of the mainstream media who suffers from a terminal case of TDS. It turned out Porthoser wasn't the only one thinking on these terms. He began to hear from others eager to join forces. The Fight Back Table, a coalition of resistance organizations. Where do you always hear resistance organizations conferred with? Well, that would be the likes of Black Lives Matter, different college and university groups. Oh, we're the resistance. We need to fight that evil fascist. So that's the type of the people from the Fight Back Table had begun scenario planning around the potential for a contested election, gathering liberal activists at the local and national level, what they called the Democracy Defense Coalition. Voting rights and civil rights organizations were raising alarms. A group of former elected officials was rehearsing emergency powers they feared Trump might exploit. Protect Democracy was assembling a bipartisan election crisis task force. It turned out that once you said it out loud, people agreed, Porthoser said. And it started building momentum. He assembled a bunch of swamp people who understood the different machinations that you could use to your advantage when you were in the White House. Understood that there were different legal paths that Trump could take. All you need to do is just take a look back in 2000, what Bush and Gore did at the same time, and understand that there are different avenues that Trump could take in the case of a tight election. Now they had to identify how they could make this a tight election, and in 2019, that didn't seem very likely. So, on March 3rd, Porthoser drafted a 3-page confidential memo titled Threats to the 2020 Election. Now remember, March 3rd was just at the time where all the coronavirus stuff was starting to make waves. It hadn't quite breached the shores, or maybe it had. It was very early in its infancy, because I remember everything shutting down in and around March 16th-ish, somewhere around mid-March. Trump had made it very clear that this will not be a fair election, and he will reject anything but his own re-election as fake and rigged. There was no indication of that at the time. This is just pure projection. On November 3rd, should the media report otherwise, he will use the right-wing information system. Could you explain to me what that would have been? Is there a right-wing information system? I'm not aware of it. To establish his narrative and incite his supporters to protest. Oh, terrible. The memo laid out 4 categories of challenges: attacks on voters, attack on election administration, attack on Trump's political opponents, and efforts to reverse the result of the election. So, okay, let's just fill this out a little bit. Attack on voters. Yes, Trump and his team went after certain types of voters, ones that were born in the 1800s and the like. Attack on election administration. Poll watchers. What happened that night at the State Farm Arena? Attack on Trump's political opponents, making vague accusations that certain politically affiliated people weren't doing their job from both the right and the left. From the left for obvious reasons, and then on the right with Raffensperger and everything that happened in Georgia. and efforts to reverse the results of the election. That's obviously lawsuits. Then COVID-19 erupted at the height of the primary election season. Normal methods of voting were no longer safe, unless you asked Fauci at the time when he said that it was all right to vote in person. But that's all right. That was probably one of those odds or evens, whatever you guys were listening to at the time when it comes to him and his observations and advice. So that one might have just been skipped over because he didn't really hear word one about him saying that it's all cool to go in and just take extra precautions. Was that the time that he was championing, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 masks? I can't remember. So chaos ensued. Ohio shut down in-person voting for its primary, leading to a minuscule turnout. A poll worker shortage in Milwaukee, where Wisconsin's heavily Democratic black population is concentrated. That comes up a little bit later. Left just 5 open polling places, down from 182. In New York, vote counting took more than a month. But I am obligated to remind you that mail-in voting is the most safe and secure method in order to preserve our democracy. So here's where Porthoser got a bit more tactical acumen. He called in some of the big guns to learn how to take best advantage of this crisis. Porthoser began working from his laptop at his kitchen table, holding back-to-back Zoom meetings for hours a day with his network of contacts across a progressive universe. The labor movement, the institutional left, like Planned Parenthood and Greenpeace. That's funny how Planned Parenthood is just automatically a institutionally left organization. But we need not tangent any further. Resistance groups like Indivisible and Move On, progressive data geeks and strategists, representatives of donors and foundation, state-level grassroots organizers, racial justice activists, and others. You guys can draw all the parallels to all of those different groups. This dude was mobilizing his forces, and that's something that I will definitely give Democrats mega props for, because they know how to organize and mobilize and use whatever tricks they can think of. Protecting the election would require an effort of unprecedented scale. Protecting the election. Remember, this guy thought that there was going to be a significant crisis in this election cycle if something wasn't happening. So protecting the election would require an effort of unprecedented scale. As 2020 progressed, it stretched to Congress, Silicon Valley, and the nation's state houses. It drew energy from the summer's racial justice protests, many of whose leaders were a key part of the Liberal Alliance, and eventually it reached across the aisle into the world of Trump-skeptical Republicans appalled by his attacks on democracy, i.e. the Lincoln Project. Now, they knew they couldn't win over some of the state houses. The vast majority of the state houses in the swing states, in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, what have you, all of the states, the houses at least, are, if not entirely Republican, most of them are entirely Republican. The governor is as well, except for in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Theoretically, there's a Republican in the Georgia governorship, but he proved not to be an ally, so they needed to make sure that they could get their protection in place before it would have came up to the different state house levels, which they were very successful in doing, because they would have been required for different audits to take place, for different other tertiary security measures to take place. We've been over all of that stuff before, so they made sure that they had all of the access via Congress, just making a big fuss about literally everything, and they used Silicon Valley's censorship, or rather crusade against misinformation, to make everything literally toxic. That was against their narrative that they were trying to fortify. All right, so the next subsection, securing the vote. The first task was overhauling America's bulky election infrastructure in the middle of a pandemic. It wasn't bulky before, it worked wonderfully for the past 200 years, but for what they're trying to do, I'm sure that's probably why it was bulky. For the thousands of local, mostly nonpartisan officials who administered election, no. Most of your election officials are either appointed by a governor who very much has a partisan lean, or they are also elected as well. Like, I'll just use Arizona as an example. Adrian Fontes was running the elections in Arizona, and he was a Democrat. Meanwhile, every other high-ranking individual in Arizona mostly was a Republican. And nearly every other official there also has a party affiliation to it, so you can't say that these were nonpartisan officials. They were people that could be swayed based by their political ideology, whatever team they're rooting for. The most urgent need was money. There you go. Just kind of lay it out there. They say that they needed protective equipment like masks, gloves, hand sanitizers. Well, if you send everybody home and you're supposed to stop counting, why would you need so many masks, gloves, and hand sanitizers? Just asking for a friend. They needed additional staff and scanners. Yeah, it's pretty easy when you just send some people out of the room. I guess you guys are just going to use shifts when it's coming to PPE in order to make sure that you don't blow your budget. Oh my God. So they were going to be out of money. And here we go. Private philanthropy stepped into the breach. An assortment of foundations contributed tens of millions in election administration funding. The Chan Zuckerberg Initiative chipped in $300 million. I guess all of those Zoom calls with your friends in Silicon Valley really paid off. Because I can't think of another Zuckerberg out there, so... Yep, there you go. It was a failure at the federal level that 2,500 local election officials were forced to apply for philanthropic grants to fill their needs. Well, if you just keep raising the bar higher and higher to an unattainable level, well, you're just going to have to reach out for external money however you need. Democratic lawyers battled a historic tide of pre-election litigation. Yes, a few instances went before the Supreme Court. I especially remember Pennsylvania and, I forget there was another one, about the validity of late mail-in ballots. And this was at the time when ACB, apparently the smartest woman to have ever been a judge ever in the history of women, had to recuse herself because she didn't have time to be briefed on everything, and because John Roberts, Chief Justice of the court, by the way, appointed by George W. Bush, staunch Republican, cucked and sided with the liberals, so it ended up just being a 4-4 split, and ended up allowing late ballots to be counted. That's just one instance, but it's very rare that something regarding an election goes before the Supreme Court prior to the election, so I suppose a few cases is probably historic. The pandemic intensified the party's usual tangling in the courts, but the lawyers noticed something else as well. The litigation brought by the Trump campaign of a piece of broader campaign to sow doubt about mail voting. Well, there's substantial evidence of that already. You didn't need to wait for the Trump campaign to bring that up. It was making novel claims and using theories no court has ever accepted. It's still the case, actually, because they just continue to throw everything out wholesale. They read more like lawsuits designed to send a message rather than achieve a legal outcome. That sounds like confession through projection, if I have ever seen it. And here's where the lockdown comes in. Not the COVID lockdown, but the social media lockdown. The disinformation defense. Bad actors spreading false information is nothing new. Yes, we're reading one right now. For decades, campaigns have grappled with everything from anonymous calls claiming the election has been rescheduled. If you're dumb enough to believe that, I don't want you to be able to vote. With everything from anonymous flyers spreading nasty smears about candidates' families. Yeah, just turn on your TV and you'll be hit with candidate B traffics in disinformation. Deep voice, scary movie trailer guy who moonlights with extra political work during the off 4-year cycle. But Trump's lies and conspiracy theories. Conspiracy is now back to being a bad term, by the way. With the viral force of social media and the involvement of foreign meddlers made disinformation a broader, deeper threat to the 2020 vote. That's a big, bold claim. Oh, right. I remember, though, 2016, that was all Russian hacks, right? Yeah, 100%. And something about Russia and Iran meddling in this cycle as well. But they were pretending to be Proud Boys, and that was weird. That story just kind of came and went. The solution, she concluded, was to pressure platforms to enforce their rules. Their rules. Oh, that's interesting. Both by removing content or accounts that spread disinformation. Remember, they're the ones who are telling you what the good information is, and they just want you to enforce your rules to get rid of the bad information. And by more aggressively policing it in the first place. Setting up your algorithms with certain words in it that whenever they are placed in a message, automatically trigger a little fact check symbol. The platform have policies against certain types of malign behavior, but they haven't been enforcing them hard enough for Laura Quinn. She co-founded the Catalyst Foundation, by the way. In November 2019, Mark Zuckerberg invited 9 civil rights leaders to dinner at his home, where they warned him about the danger of the election-related falsehoods that were already spreading unchecked. In November 2019, a year prior, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to press X to doubt on that one. These are just more insane people with terminal cases of TDS, just wondering why they still allow Trump on their platform. Why won't you kick him off? He's literally Hitler. It took pushing, urging, conversations, brainstorming, all of that to get to a place where he ended up with more rigorous rules and enforcement, says Vanita Gupta. That just sounds dirty. President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Sounds like a fair organization, who attended the dinner and also met with Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey. Wow, I wonder what fun conversations they had about open and honest platforms, or probably who looks less like a human. It was a struggle, but we got to the point where we understood the problem. Was it enough? Probably not. Was it was it later than we wanted? Yes, but it was really important given the level of official disinformation that had been those rules in place and were tagging things and taking them down. So this is using the boiling frog theory. You guys are familiar with this one. You put a frog in a pot of boiling water and he'll immediately jump out. But if you continuously raise the temperature of the water until it's boiling, you'll effectively cook the frog. And if you're French, you're probably, getting wood. But this was, just put up these fact-checking things right now. We're a year out. We'll be able to condition the populace that these are just something that's new to the platform, and we're just trying to help you. We don't want you to be duped by anything. There's so many conspiracy theories out there right now that we don't want you guys to fall into that. So when the election cycle kicks off and when everything gets in there, this is already something that's there, and you'll know what to believe and what's garbage. So we're just looking out for your benefit. But we'll never know exactly what was said at those meetings, what was said at those dinners, what was said on those Zoom calls. But we have a good idea based on what everything looked like during the latter half of 2020. So spreading the word. Beyond battling bad information, there was a need to explain a rapidly changing election process. It was crucial for voters to understand that despite what Trump was saying, mail-in votes weren't susceptible to fraud. Whew, that's a big claim. That despite what Trump was saying, it would be normal in some states that weren't finished counting votes on election night. Yes, they primed and puckered everybody for the incoming late night vote dick that you wouldn't be hearing from again for another couple of years. Not much more to that. It just shows that there was a bunch more people that were brought into the fray and they just made another big group. It's the same type of people, but just from different organizations and probably used to work at the different ones and social or racial equity clubs. People power. This is good. The racial justice uprising sparked by George Floyd's killing in May was not primarily a political movement. Oh, it was very quickly a political movement. Let's not be fucking frank about this. The organizers who helped lead it wanted to harness the momentum for the election without allowing it to be co-opted by politicians. No, just the right politicians, by the way. Many of those organizers were part of Porthauser's network. Interesting. From the activists in battleground states who partnered with Democracy Defense Coalition to organizations with leading roles in the movement for Black Lives. Oh, in the movement for Black Lives. I think we know those under a different term, a much more colloquial term. Black Lives Matter? Sounds about right? Yeah, exactly. This dude knew exactly what was needed, because when was the last time Black Lives Matter was relevant? 2016. Oh, and you know what? If something like this was coming up, I'm sure that Black Lives Matter would have made another resurgence some way or somehow, but this was just a perfect opportunity, and you know what? Just unleash your forces onto the crowd. The best way to ensure people's voices were heard, they decided, was to protect their ability to vote. During early voting and on election day, they surrounded lines with voters in urban areas with a Joy to the Polls effort, which are not allowed to campaign at polling locations, regardless if it's early voting or not. And considering everybody that Porthauser was bringing together, just because they weren't expressly carrying Biden-Harris signs or anything like that, that was still the message that they were pushing. It's one of those things like, how do you prove collusion? Okay, most of the deals are made, offline, at a dinner, at a golf course. Nobody says, let's fuck over Parlor in an email. So they try to make it as obfuscated as possible. And that's what these organizers did as well. They had their message, but their front face was much, much less obvious. And this is when we got the unholy alliance of the unions and the Chamber of Commerce. Okay, the merging of the worker and the business. Weird. The AFL-CIO and the chamber have a long history of antagonism. Though neither organization is explicitly partisan, the influential business lobby has poured hundreds of millions of dollars into Republican campaigns. Not this time around, and not in 2016. You can fucking well bet that. But behind the scenes, the business community was engaged in its own anxious discussion about how the election and its aftermath might unfold, because they already put all of their money and all of their resources behind backing up Black Lives Matter, so they knew which way they were going to be voting, so they needed to make sure that things might tip in that direction. Is a logical progression your mind can make. The statement was released on Election Day under the names of the Chamber of CEO Thomas Donahue, interesting, AFL-CIO President Richard Trumka, and the head of the National Association of Evangelicals and the National African American Clergy Network. That dude needs to go ahead and tighten that title a little bit. That's excessive. It is imperative that election officials be given the space and time to count every vote in accordance with applicable laws. I'll let that lie. We call on the media, the candidates, and the American people to exercise patience with the process and trust our system. Trust our system. I'll always point out that hour in there, even if it requires more time than usual, the groups added up. Although we may not always agree on the desired outcomes up and down the ballot, I beg to differ. You guys definitely agree on the desired outcome. We are united in our call for Americans' democratic process to proceed without violence, intimidation, or any other tactics that make us weaker as a nation. Hopefully they didn't see any of the footage coming out of the 3rd and the 4th when everything was being counted. Here's where it gets a little bit more juicy as well. Election night began with many Democrats despairing. Trump was running ahead of pre-election polling. Yup. Winning Florida, Ohio, and Texas easily, and keeping Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania too close to call. I remember those hundreds of thousands of votes leads in Michigan and Pennsylvania all too well, and a sizable lead in Wisconsin, probably comparable to that of Pennsylvania and Michigan, but because the population base isn't there, it just wouldn't be possible, and cows didn't vote. I don't think. I don't have access to the voter rolls. But Porthoser was unperturbed when he spoke to him that night. Interesting. The returns were exactly in line with his modeling. He had been warning for weeks that Trump voters' turnout was surging. Oh, yes. As the numbers dribbled out, he could tell that as long as all the votes were counted, Trump would lose. Why would somebody who had access to internal polling, seeing that Trump was just absolutely killing it in comparison to pre-election polling, knowing that he already conditioned the public to expect no realistic results for a considerable amount of time, would be so certain in his convictions? It's almost like they could probably hear the printer whirling in the background. The conversation that followed was a difficult one, led by the activists charged with the protest strategy. We wanted to be mindful of when was the right time to call for the moving masses of people into the streets, Peoples says. That would be Angela Peoples, the director of the Democracy Defense Coalition, who's been with Porthoser for a very long time. As much as they were eager to mount a show of strength, mobilizing immediately could backfire and put people at risk. Protests that devolved into violent clashes would give Trump a pretext to send in federal agents or troops as he had over the summer. Where, exactly? To the Portland Federal Building? Or when the Minnesota governor called in the national troops because Black Lives Matter was burning down targets and most of Minneapolis and St. Paul. Would that be one? Probably. And rather than elevate Trump's complaints by continuing to fight him, the alliance wanted to send a message that the people had spoken. Yes, so they just spurged out on TV. They already had all of their friends in mainstream media, and they were all too happy to oblige. And now with a newfound alliance with Fox News, they knew that they could just go ahead and run the table on traditional media. And the same with big tech as well. Like, they already conditioned everybody. So Wednesday through Friday, there was not a single Antifa versus Proud Boys incident like anyone was expecting. No, because Antifa was just running around unchecked. And when that didn't materialize, I don't think Trump campaign had a backup plan. They wouldn't have been banking on that, okay? The Proud Boys aren't Trump's fucking stormtroopers as much as you guys would like them to be. They just aren't. So yes, they got all their votes counted and Trump had lost, but the battle wasn't over. 5 steps to victory. So here's a shocker. in Porthoser's presentation, winning the vote was only the first step to winning the election. After that came winning the count, winning the certification, winning the electoral college, and winning the transition. Steps that are normally formalities, but when he knew Trump would see as opportunities for disruption. Nowhere would that be more evident than in Michigan, where Trump's pressure on local Republicans came perilously close to working. I wouldn't point out Michigan, I'd say Georgia. Theoretically, that one was the closest, and in Michigan, he had several allies in the state houses, but his state house support was much stronger in Pennsylvania. And Michigan is just a bad example to draw, because as you can see here, they have this picture. Conveniently, they have it before all the poster board was put up as well, and it just makes the Trump supporters look like raving lunatics. But remember how they said earlier here they needed a whole bunch of money for masks, and the Trump supporters weren't wearing any of them, and they were getting perilously close to everybody. As you can see here, literally everybody that's pictured has a mask on. So I think that your little propaganda here is kind of backfiring, and we all seen the videos. Those windows in the TCF Center, Cobo Hall, they were boarded up very, very quickly, because nothing streams transparency and strength quite like counting ballots in the middle of the night. So this also tells us harrowing story of Art Reyes III. He's a Flint native who leads We the People Michigan, another progressive institution. He made his way to the arena and sent word to his network. Within 45 minutes, dozens of reinforcements have arrived. Interesting. As he entered the arena to provide a counterweight to the GOP observers inside, they weren't actually inside where any of the counting was happening, but that's as close as they ever got. Reyes took down their cell phone numbers and added them to a massive text chain, which we never got access to. Racial justice activists from Detroit Will Breathe worked alongside suburban women from Femmes for Dems. That already makes me want to throw up a lot. And local elected officials. Reyes left at 3 a.m. He got there at 10 in the afternoon, or 10 in the evening rather, handing the text chain over to a disability activist. All of these activists that are involved with elections. I don't like it. But that's the depths that these people went to in order to fortify the election. The pro-democracy forces, that's what we're calling these progressive outlets now. They're just pro-democracy forces. We're up against a Trumpified Michigan GOP controlled by allies of Ronna McDaniel. Calling Ronna Romney McDaniel an ally of Trump is a gross overestimation of her abilities. The Republican National Committee chair and Betsy DeVos, not a Trumper anymore, okay? She got in as Secretary of Education, I do believe, and proceeded to do fucking nothing, because she was a longtime donor to the RNC, and she was one of those Mitch McConnell, hey, Trump, you need to make sure and give my friend a nice position, because she's a good person. Thanks, Yertle. And now they just go off the hinges. On a call with his team on November 18th, Basson vented that his side's pressure was no match for what Trump could offer. This is the type of projection that Democrats use on Trump, because these are the tactics that they've used forever. Of course he's going to try to offer them something, Basson recalls, thinking. Head of Space Force, ambassador to whoever. We can't compete with that by offering carrots. We need a stick. In order to sway the people that were in charge of the elections, Trump could somehow, if something were to happen with the count, somehow give that person preferential treatment. I don't get it. That's never been the case. He'll just fire somebody who isn't doing their job properly. But we're just about done here. That left one step. The state canvassing board, made up of 2 Democrats and 2 Republicans. You guys remember this one as well. When the meeting began, Reyes activists flooded the live stream and filled Twitter with their hashtags, all eyes on Michigan. The board, accustomed to attendance in the single digits, suddenly faced an audience of thousands. And remember those couple of unhinged people that were in there saying that, your children will be disappointed and the stain of this will haunt your entire lineage, in such colorful language as that, and doxed where her kids and her mother worked. It was fucking insane. That was that live stream, and that was when the vote for Wayne County got certified and then got decertified, and then it was certified hinging a full audit that was later retracted, and then nothing ever happened with it. The vote was 3-0 to certify. The other Republican abstained. Yes. Anyway, so we're just about done. There was one last milestone on Porthoser's mind, January 6th. On the day Congress would meet and tally the electoral count, Trump summoned his supporters to D.C. for a rally. And then, yes, the Capitol Hill riot just ended up being another unintended victory for this evil cabal of people. It was a final attack on democracy, and once again, it failed. By standing down, the democracy campaigners outfoxed their foes. We won by the skin of our teeth, honestly. Really? No. Mike Pence already said he wasn't going to do anything, and nobody was willing to see the evidence. There was, like a handful of senators prior to the storming happening, and then at the end of the day, it just ended up being 6 and 7 senators contesting 2 out of the proposed 7 states. So, nothing like being hyperbolic. And this is how this overwhelming propaganda piece ends. Democracy won in the end. The will of the people prevailed. But it's crazy, in retrospect, that this is what it took to put on an election in the United States of America. Yes, to secure the outcome that you were so scared of being in jeopardy of. Like I said at the onset, all of this is supposed to seem overwhelming because, as you can see, I'm just going to go ahead and scroll back up while we're talking here. This is very well thought out. This took months to plan. This is by somebody who is very experienced in the ways of the election, in the ways of assembling grassroots support, and knew exactly how to go about it, knowing that there are so many different cracks in the Republican foundation that hate Trump, and they knew that they could be exploited. They knew that the Republican Party is weak, and they took it. Are those same cracks available in the DNC? Yes, they're not the exact same ones, but those cracks and those fissures are very much there. That's why I very much think that Trump, or somebody who's only going to run for one term, somebody with the same mindset, needs to run again in 2024 to set up the foundation, use the wave of support that's coming in order to make sure that the right people are put back in so a situation like this can't happen again. They made this article very, very well, okay? I'm not going to fault them on their effort and their reporting on this because it was extensive, showing the lengths that Mike Porthoser went to in order to secure victory. They let out a bunch of different things that they went and may or may not have usurped their authority in order to exert, but I understand. You have a story that you want to tell. And the story is, there's no hope for you. Submit. We have this all figured out. But they don't. A winning ticket, a ticket that won honestly, doesn't have to go to thousands of words in order to convince you that there's no option. We got this figured out. No. This is just one of those demoralization tactics. I'm seeing so many people report this as like, oh, it's so scary. Look at them. They're announcing that they did something. They instead of saying cheated, they say fortified. Okay, cool. You went 3 or 4 paragraphs deep. We just went through this entire fucking article. We picked out a bunch of the different things in there. This video is super long and barely anybody's going to be watching to the end here when I'm doing my final wrap up. But it's important to understand that they are trying to tell a narrative. The importance of all of this stuff, getting all of their friends from the different corners of the political spectrum, from the different outlets that they could go ahead and bring under their tent in order to push out their message. This is very much a part of it. This is the strategy that's laid out right there for you. And like I said, it's made to make you think that you are weak. And if you submit to that, that sucks. But I know my audience, at least I think I do. If you're watching this long, you're not discouraged by this. They laid it out here. This is their final plan. They're just going to try to ride out their success for 4 years. Maybe make a couple of tweaks to this formula because they told you a lot here, but they didn't tell you everything that they know. All you need to do is just make sure that there is a significant force to push against this insanity for 2024. I've been preaching this for a long time. You need to hunker down, you need to get better. And that's both personally and if you wish to be involved in this. Hone your thinking, hone your strategy. Learn from both sides of the aisle because there's a bunch of valuable information that was in here. I hope you took that away as well, seeing how long they planned. And that's something that Trump either didn't do out of the inability to, lacking the resource, or potentially the arrogance of having a ridiculously tremendous economy, putting too much stock behind that and anticipating that the coup would just dissipate over, a couple of weeks and not anticipating all of the changes that could have happened stemming from that. No, I'm glad Time published this, and they did it for a reason. And yeah, if there's anything in here that you think I missed, feel free to go through the article as well, and it'll be very unlikely we're going to get another insight into this level of the Democratic machine anytime soon. With that said, I thank you all very, very much for the gift of your time, especially on this one. I've been Don Consuelo. I want you to follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.